It's part 7 of the video series, and this part is going to be about the CSCS round 5. We went to the CSCS last week, which was the E55's first official time attack, and we've made quite a lot of changes to the car since the previous part, and we did all these changes in the last 3 weeks, so I didn't have an awful lot of time to upload all those videos, so that's why I didn't upload anything. But for now, for this video, is just gonna cover everything about the CSCS, and then later on, I guess maybe next week I'll upload the videos of how we made all these changes and cover them in a bit more detail. So starting off with the most problematic change, it was the tires. The CSCS regulations for this year say that if you're competing in the Super Street category, you have to go with Pirelli tires. There's no other option. So we had to change the BF Goodrich tires and go with the Pirelli tires, which was really a step down. And most of the people I talked to, they said that you will lose about 2 seconds of track time just by switching onto these tires. Now the other problem we ran into with these tires was that the front tires I was running previously on the car were 275, and the suspension was set up perfectly for those tires. But the problem was Pirelli, first of all, they don't make 275 tires, they make 265. But the problem was when we tried mounting those 265 tires on these rims, it just wouldn't go on for some reason. I tried 2 different tire places, they filled the tires all the way up to 110 psi. They tried different greases, they tried tire warmers, everything, and the tire just wouldn't go on the rim. So the decision had to be made to go with 245 tires at the front. So that was a big disaster as far as the tires were concerned, because if the car is set up for 275 tires at the front and you move to 245 tires, that's like moving 3 sizes down at the front, and that adds a lot of understeer to the car. But we had no time, so we had no other option. So now going to the positive changes that we made to the car. Knowing that we were losing traction because of the tires, we went with the decision to add downforce to the car to basically gain some traction using downforce, at least through the high-speed corners. And so basically I designed the model of the car in 3D, and then according to the regulations, I just designed the biggest possible rear wing and the biggest possible front splitter that we could put on the car. And the idea is that this is a heavy car, and to basically feel any downforce at all in such a heavy car, you would need a lot of downforce. And there is more to the design than just the size, but I guess I'll cover that in the next video in a bit more detail. For now, I'll just cover how these changes worked on the track. So just to give you an idea of how last minute we ran on all these changes, this picture was just taken a day before the CSCS, and there were no front tires on the car. The front tires were not even mounted on the rim. And the car still needed a rear wing. The time that we completed the car was already night, so we had never actually seen the car in daylight when we got to the CSCS. Alright, so we're at Toronto Motorsport Park now, and we've come here so early.
6:15 a.m. we already reached.
Yeah.
The gates don't open till 9 a.m.
Yeah. We still have never seen this car in daylight. We've been working on it all night. So yeah, looking forward to see what the car actually looks like.
Forget what it behaves like. What does it look like?
We've never even seen it yet, and right now I'm pretty curious to know how the changes feel like. I guess we're gonna find out in a bit. So when the event finally started, the E55 got a lot of attention because this was the only Mercedes competing in the time attack, and yeah, there were just crowds gathering around it, people taking pictures and asking questions. But and also we got to have a look at the other cars that we were competing against, and this time there was just an insane level of competition. There were cars all the way from Lamborghini Gallardo Super Trofeos to a lot of Porsche 911 turbos to Dodge Viper ACR, a lot of modified Subarus, and a lot of insanely modified BMWs. So yeah, the level of competition this time was just way too high. Usually it's not this crazy, but I guess this was the final event of the year, so that's why, yeah, the cars here were just incredible. So when we went out for our first qualifying run, we initially set the rear wing angle to the maximum possible angle to basically generate the maximum possible downforce. And because we had to start from somewhere and then change the angle slightly to basically find the perfect balance. where the front and rear downforce were pretty much the same, and the high-speed balance of the car was pretty much perfect. But yeah, this time, the first time when I went out, this was my first time driving a downforce car, because I had never driven a car with this much downforce before. And what I immediately noticed was that the faster the car would go, it had an incredible amount of grip. And in the braking zones especially, when I was braking into the first corner, I could basically put my foot completely down, like to the point where the pedal was touching the floor, and there would be no ABS kicking in, no wheels locking up, nothing at all. The car would just stop. That's how much downforce it had. But the problem was, once the car would slow down, and especially for the slow speed corners, that downforce would really quickly go away, and then the car was all mechanical grip. And the mechanical grip wasn't all too great with these tires, especially the front tires. There was just a lot of unders here. So this first lap was actually just a warm-up lap, because you start after the start-finish straight, so it's not a timed lap, it's just so you can warm up your tires and get everything up to temperature. And all the laps after this are timed laps, and your best lap basically counts, and that's your best qualifying time. Just in the first qualifying, there were 3 qualifying runs in total. This was just the first one. So after this point, this is the last corner. After this point is where your timed laps start. Here's where you should start pushing the car from. So in the first few laps, I really wasn't used to the downforce, so I was braking really early. I was pretty much driving the same as I was driving on the previous track day, because before, the car didn't have any downforce, so it had the same grip level all the time. Like, the grip level in the high speeds was the same as the grip level in the low speed corners. But this time the car was just much different. There would be a lot of grip through the high speed corners because of the downforce, and in the low speed corners all that downforce would disappear, and then you had to rely only on the mechanical grip. So it was a really tricky thing to get used to, because I really wasn't used to driving this type of car. And yeah, in the low speed corners it also had a lot of understeer, so that was also a tricky thing to get used to. Another thing was also the drag, because before I had the rear wing and the front splitter, the car had a pretty low, like there was no significant drag. The car would accelerate just like any other car, but this time the car initially down the straight it would accelerate pretty quickly, but then as it reached close to 170 or something, it would start slowing down a little. And there was the Subaru in front of me, and I was thinking I would overtake it, but then initially when I would accelerate I would get closer to him, but then the drag was just holding me back and it was really difficult to overtake. So I wasn't sure whether to build a gap up from him and just concentrate on my own laps or try to overtake him. So over here I think I was trying to build a gap, but then I saw him slowing down. I was too far back anyways to attempt to overtake, so it was a little confusing. So now I think this was the 5th lap, and I got a pretty good gap in front of me and there was no cars in front. So I decided to do a quick lap this time. And I still wasn't fully used to the downforce, I was still braking really early. And my lines weren't perfect either. But still, I got a 123.1 this lap, I think. And 123.1 is on the last track day I managed a 120.9. So it's around 2 seconds slower than what I was getting on the previous track day. So if you minus the 2 seconds from because of the tires from the lap time we were getting previously, it does make sense that we should have been around that. But then again, the downforce should have added some time. So basically this lap I think I wasn't fully used to the downforce, so I wasn't using the downforce to my benefit. I was still braking a lot earlier than I should have braked. So I think this lap was around one of the later laps of the qualifying, I think the 10th or 11th lap. And this time I was really trying to explore the limits of the car, braking as late as possible. And the thing is, through the first corner the car had so much grip that I assumed that through the second corner I would have the same grip. So this time I braked really late and tried to carry the same speed. The car went straight off the track. There was just no grip at all once the car slowed down, and I couldn't turn it. The splitter hit the ground pretty hard, and it's a good thing we have a strong splitter because otherwise it could have broken off or something. It had a lot of mud on it, but it still didn't get damaged or anything, so that was a good thing, I guess. So in the first qualifying, my best lap remained a 1:23.1, which was okay because I knew there was a lot more potential in the car, and I just had to adapt my driving style to basically get more time out of the car. But still, I was a little worried that it might be a little too much to learn for one track day. But then again, I had a lot of time because this was just the first qualifying. There were 2 more qualifyings after this, and then the final time attack, depending on if you qualify, because only the top 6 people qualify, and it's the top 6 people, and there's a 110% rule. So basically, you have to be within the top 6, and your lap time has to be within 110% of the quickest lap time. Then only you can qualify for the final time attack, which is basically all 6 of the fastest cars going on the track together, and then they have only 5 laps to set their best lap, and then that best lap determines who wins the time attack at the end. After the first qualifying run, we made some changes to the rear wing angles. That's because in the first qualifying I noticed that the rear was a little too planted, especially through the high-speed corners. I was flooring the car on the exit of the first corner, and the rear just wouldn't slide, which is a good thing because you get more power on corner exits, but then too much rear grip could actually be a bad thing because that means that you're running a little too much rear downforce, and that could actually contribute to a bit of understeer because the rear wing is mounted farther back from the rear tires, so too much rear angle actually creates front lift. Oh, and these pictures were taken by Andrew Zhang. I linked his Flickr in the description, so you can go see all his other pictures from the event too. So this was now the second qualifying, and I went out with the new rear wing changes. And this time I was also a little more used to the downforce, so I guess I did a better job driving. This was a warm-up lap, so I was driving a little slow. I was building the gap with the car in front because he was going a little too slow too. And yeah, this time with the lesser rear wing angles, the thing I noticed was that the car was going 5 kilometers per hour faster down the straight, which is a pretty significant reduction in drag, considering we only changed the angles just slightly on the rear. And this time through the high-speed corners, the car's balance was also a little better. I could slide it if I really tried to slide it, but still, the balance was pretty good. It wasn't difficult to control the car. I was braking really late to the corners this time, so I was using the downforce as much as possible. But for this first corner, I think I overshot the braking zone a little too much. For the second corner, I got it perfectly right this time. I braked really late and really hard, and slowed the car down just enough before the corner, so I was able to get the right line. And this time my lap time was a 1:21.5, which is pretty much 2 seconds better than not 2 seconds, 1.5 seconds better than the lap time I got on the previous qualifying. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty significant improvement. But I didn't improve after this. After this, it started raining, so I couldn't go for the next run. But after that, the last qualifying I went to, I set the rear wing angles to the lowest possible angle. And that turned out to be a bit of a mistake because then at the last time, the car's balance through the high-speed corners at least was a bit of oversteer, so it was a little unstable through the high-speed corners. And I was also driving it a little too aggressively. And through this last corner the last time, I didn't have the camera set up, but I took a little too much curb, and the car just snapped into a massive oversteer. It spun out completely and ended up facing the other way. And I missed the wall, so that was a good thing, but it was pretty scary. So after that, I didn't play around with the rear wing angles anymore. I just set it to pretty much the same angle it was on this qualifying. So this was the timesheet after the qualifyings. I was car number 700 with a lap time of 1:21.561. This timesheet actually has all the cars, not just the cars in my category. In my category, I was the 6th position, so 6th was the lowest position you needed to get to qualify. so I made it through the qualifying. But the problem was that the car behind me was a second behind me, so there was no threat from that. It was a Corvette 06. But the people ahead of me were all in the 118s. So that's a big gap. That's a gap of 3 seconds. And so yeah, 3 seconds is a gap big enough that no matter what you do to your driving style or to the suspension setup or anything, you can't gain 3 seconds. That's just impossible. So yeah, I did go out for the final time with the top 6 cars for the final time attack, but I knew that there was no place that I could go anything above 6th, so I didn't push it too much. So here's a video that my friend made from the outside when I was competing with the top 6 cars. I unfortunately forgot to set up my camera on the roof, so I don't have any footage of it from inside the car. I only have this footage that my friend recorded from the outside. So yeah, this black BMW was it's called a Weapon M. That's the BMW that's extremely quick. It's been winning this event for the past few rounds. And yeah, what I realized this time was that through the corners, E55 wasn't all too bad. He was still keeping up with the cars more or less, but down the straights, that BMW just disappeared. There was just no chance of keeping up to him. It had so much power that, yeah, I mean, E55 is it's not underpowered or anything. It's still a pretty powerful car, but that car just had way too much power. There was no chance of keeping up to him down the straights. Down here, I think I was somewhere in the middle of the track, and you can already see that the BMW is pretty far ahead of me. Um, so yeah, I think it was good that I went out for the final time, even though I didn't push the car too much to the limit or anything. I still realized what my car lacked and what was a good thing about my car. And I guess the good part was that the handling wasn't all too bad, especially for a heavy car. Um, Compared to all these other cars that are much lighter than it, it was still more or less keeping up to the other cars in the corners. But down the streets, it just stood no chance at all against that BMW. BMW would just fly down the streets, and yeah, I guess that's where it was gaining most of the time on the 55. So here's the car after the time attack. It made it back in one piece. And the bad thing was that the tires were just horrible. There was no traction at the front. But the good thing was that the aero worked out really well. So basically we lost 2 seconds because of the tires, but we regained 1.5 seconds because of the aero. And that's where our lap time was really this time. Oh, also, I think I didn't mention before, this thing at the front, we added another heat exchanger. It's the same heat exchanger that the factory E55 has, but it's just the second one in series with that one. And this really did the trick with the heat soak issue we were facing last time, because this time there was no heat soak at all. The intake temperatures were sitting around 70 degrees, which is a little warm, but it's not to the point where there's any heat soak or any significant loss in power at least. So it made a big difference. So yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned was about the rear wing. I was surprised how big of a difference it makes just changing the rear wing angles. So that was pretty surprising for me. This is the first time I actually experimented with the rear wing angles and everything. Other than that, yeah, I think the front tires will need to get rid of these because these tires are just not the right size for this car. They're much smaller than the previous tires. I don't know if you remember when the previous tire. Just looking at this fender gap over here, you can just see how much skinnier these tires are compared to the tires I had before on the car. So yeah, I'll definitely need to change these. And the other thing I noticed at least on the final time when I was driving behind that BMW, was that the U55 wasn't all too bad in the corners. I was keeping up with the other cars through the corners, but as soon as it would get to the straight, the other cars would just disappear when I was in that final run with the top 6 cars. So I think that's where I really need to focus on now for next year to improve the power. So I guess that's all for this video. The next video is going to be about the splitter and the rear wing. And now it's pretty much winter in Canada, so there's not going to be any more track days or anything because the tracks are closed through the winter. But that is also a good thing because now we have a lot of time to work on the engine modifications. I'm thinking of turbocharging the car over the winter. And before that, I also have some other parts lying around that I need to install. I have a limited slip differential that I need to install and a few other small things. So yeah, all that is still to come. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next part.